So in my last video, I talked about my memory, and I wanted to say some more about that. Apparently, what I have is something called hyperthymesia, which is when you remember everything. And I wanted to say a few more things about some of my early memories. One of the things I want to say is that I remember everything, and I mean every day, just like normal everyday life, going back to about the age of 3 or 4, definitely pre-kindergarten. I remember my daily routine before I started school. I remember nursery school. I remember learning to read at age 3. And I remember a lot of memories from before that. I can say that one of the memories that I have is being held by my mother, and I would have been less than 2 years old, and we were watching my father and my older brothers build an addition onto our house. And so I don't remember dates. And I know that's one of the main things that people use to define hyperthymesia. But to me, that doesn't really seem to be one of the defining traits, because my memory goes back to before I even learned what dates were. I didn't care what day of the week it was when I was a baby. And so the dates to me are an irrelevant thing that's more like a trick. It has nothing to do with my actual memory. The fact that I remember things back to being a baby, I think, is the defining trait. So another one is that I remember the day that my parents came home. My sister had been born. My sister is 2 years younger than I am. And I remember when they came home from the hospital. And I remember where we were, what we were doing. I remember where I was at the time, and I was excited when they came home, and I ran over to see them. And then, of course, I remember when my next sister was born, but that was 2 years after that. I remember things in detail, and I want to make that clear. All these memories aren't stories that someone told me, and I'm remembering the stories. No, I remember these events. No one told them to me. And in fact, many of these memories were ones that other people weren't present for, or at least they would have had a very different perspective. So these are my memories, and they have emotion, they have sensation. Like, I remember all the physical sensations of these memories. I remember the smells of things. I remember how things felt against my skin. I remember the way the air was. I remember everything. Like, if you were asking me to describe something right now, I could tell you all those things, and I could tell you the same thing about then, the way things tasted, what I was eating at the time. Although it's sometimes hard to describe a smell or a taste, but I remember them. I remember the way foods tasted to me, things I would have throughout my life. I remember that when my dad was doing that addition on the house, there was a part of the upstairs where he was adding on. So the downstairs existed already, and he was adding a second level, a second floor. And the front part of the house had a second floor, and so if you went upstairs, there was a door that previously had led out onto the roof. And then after he added the addition, that just led into the rest of the house. But I remember when I would go up those stairs, and there was a door there, which later wasn't there. And I remember what that door was like. It was a door that had lots of little glass panels, and lots of, the frames with so there were lots of glass panels. And so I remember that door was kind of an old, worn, green door with all the glass panels. And I remember that I was told to stay away from that door when they were doing the construction, so I wouldn't go out, or just stay away from in general because they didn't want me to go out on the roof. It was a very old house. I remember the fish tank that we had in our back room, our dining room. We had an aquarium, and I remember exactly what kind of fish we had. Not only that, but I remember the names of each fish. I remember what kind of fish they were because I heard my family members say what each one was, and so I have that memorized in my head. I know that I could tell you exactly each fish and the way the fish interacted with each other, like which ones didn't get along and would fight, and which ones were very easygoing. I remember every fish, because to me, that was like a whole world, and I remember everything about it. But I would have been 2 or younger. I remember all my toys, of course. I remember when I got them, how I felt about them, and how I felt when I couldn't find them anymore, because sometimes my mom didn't think I would notice when she would swap out some of my toys. She had this old school mentality that you had to rotate toys or whatever. And so she would take some of my toys and then bring out old ones that she'd hidden. And I'd be like, what happened to my toys? Where did they go? I didn't think my mom was taking them. I was just like, where's my toy? But again, I was young. I wasn't really able to communicate this. I remember that my sister, I remember when they set us up in a room so that, because we shared a room when we were all really, really young. And I remember sitting beside my sister, or having my bed beside my sister's bed. And it was just the two of us in this room because we were both young. And I remember that she was just a baby, and that she would be scared when they would turn off the light. And because our beds were next to each other, like right next to each other, she would reach out and I would hold her hand until she fell asleep. And we did this every night, and no one else would know this. I doubt she would remember that, but I remember that. I remember holding her hand until she fell asleep, and then I would feel safe falling asleep after that. But I would have been 2, probably 2.5, something like that. And I remember that absolutely distinctly, like it just happened. What else do I remember? I remember learning to read. I remember that I learned to read because my dad would read us bedtime stories, and he would read me a bedtime story where it was just me. So it was just my dad and myself. And he would read to me, and I would pay attention and follow along as he was reading, and I would watch the words, and that's how I learned to read, was looking at the book as he was reading it. And I remember that by the time I was, 3 or 4, when other people would try to read to me, I was like, I've already read all these, because I would read things myself then. Once I learned to read, I kind of, from paying attention, I just kind of taught myself. And then I would just read everything we had. I remember all the different meals that we would have, everything that we would eat. Again, this would have been when I was 2 or younger. And I remember how everything tasted, because our lifestyle changed considerably, so that the way we ate at that time was different than the way we ate after my sisters were born. So we didn't eat the same things. We didn't eat the same way. We didn't even eat in the same room. And so I remember very clearly how things were before I was 2 I remember that we would say grace, which we didn't do after that. And I remember the chairs that we had, which I don't even know where they went, but I remember the chairs that we had, and I remember the sound that they made when you would sit on them. And I remember the feel, the texture of the tablecloth and the patterns on it. It was kind of a blue, flowery thing. And I remember the way that my parents interacted, which of course then was different later. And all of my older siblings were there, and they were gone later. So I remember all of these details going back to, well, in that case, before I was 2. And then I remember quite a few details from when I was small enough that I wasn't able to speak and I was being held by someone. I don't remember being born. I don't remember being a baby, and I probably don't remember anything before I was a few months old. I'm not sure how old I was in my earliest memories. I know that I was young, and I know that some of my memories are before the age of 2, so I was obviously 1 or before 1, somewhere in there. But I don't think I remember anything from being just a few months old. So I know that some people define hyperthymesia based on whether you know the exact dates, but all these things I'm saying, I don't know the dates, the exact, like what day of the week it was, and honestly, I don't care. And there's no reason for me to want to know that information. And my life, my entire life, I remember just as clearly. I remember every day what was going on and what I did and how it felt. But the dates are not important to me. They never were. I didn't really care. I mean, I'm sure when I was in high school or elementary school, the days probably meant something to me, but I didn't make an effort to try to remember that. And I know that one of the ways they try to define that is that they'll say that people were obsessed with dates, but I was never obsessed with dates, and yet I have this memory, this incredible memory. But it's not connected with dates. So whether or not that rules me out for a definition as having hyperthymesia, I don't really care. All I know is I remember a lot, going way back to when I was really young. All right, well, I guess that's it for this video. Bye.